It's really not often enough that I get to salute not one, but two of my favorite people. So tonight I want to embrace that opportunity. There is no one in America who fights more relentlessly, more passionately, and more effectively for the cause of freedom than Frank Gaffney. If you care about liberty and about the defining principles of the West, equality, freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, peace through the strength of both our culture and our armed forces, Frank Gaffney's your guy. And if you do, you owe a great debt of gratitude to Frank and to the bulwark of freedom that he has made of the Center for Security Policy. We don't say thank you for that nearly enough, Frank. So tonight I want to make sure that we all say thank you for all Frank does for our country. We could never repay you for it, but we honor you for it, and we're forever in debt for your patriotism. Thank you. Next, I'd like to say a few words about my friend Michael Mukasey, who will always be Judge Mukasey to me, not just because that's how I first came to know him, but because I think he remains the model of what we want a judge to be. When it comes to the notion of treating international terrorism as a law enforcement matter, there are many bad things to say about that. I know that because I've said them all. I've evidently said them so notoriously that just last week, the thoughtful progressives at Salon magazine anointed me the leader of the alleged Islamophobe faction of the American conservative movement. And you can tell the American conservative movement is really in need of an Arab Spring. Not only do we not have one of those nice Sharia constitutions that the State Department writes for all its favorite new democracies, those shining cities on a hill where people are put on capital trial for what they believe and what they say, we Islamophobes haven't even had a popular election. You can tell we haven't had a popular election because despite the fact that Salon claims that the Islamophobes include such luminaries as Michelle Bachmann, John Bolton, and yes, Frank Gaffney, somehow I've ended up as the leader. And some leader, right? The Obama administration is quick to point out that even those lovable, largely secular moderates from the Muslim Brotherhood now have more democratic legitimacy than I do. But to go back to the matter of treating the jihad against America as a crime problem rather than a national security challenge, there is one very good argument for using the courts, and it's a hugely significant argument. It is this: juries represent the common sense and the values of American life. William F. Buckley, Jr., the legendary pioneer of the modern American conservative movement and the founder of National Review, famously said that he'd rather entrust the government of the United States to the first 400 people listed in the Boston telephone directory than to the faculty of Harvard University. Well, now that we've spent 4 years being governed by the faculty of Harvard University, we can see that the pioneer has been vindicated yet again. We can also see that the American people would be a lot better protected if national security were designed by the 12 New Yorkers who sat in Michael Mukasey's courtroom for 9 months than by, say, an intelligence community that thinks that reaching out to Taliban moderates is the way to fix Afghanistan, or by a Justice Department that thinks that reaching out to the Muslim Brotherhood's moderates is the way to fix American counterterrorism, or by a military brass that can't see its way to a single mention of the word Islam or the word jihad in a 75-page report about the Fort Hood massacre, the worst terrorist atrocity in this country since 9/11, a mass murder that claimed twice as many American lives as the 1993 World Trade Center attack. There's a remarkable thing about juries, something that shouldn't be remarkable but is. They tend to take their oath very seriously. They do not decide cases based on bigotry or hysteria, only based on evidence, and with a fidelity to the law as the judge instructs them on it. Another unremarkable thing is that jurors, being ordinary Americans, tend to be rational. They will not convict people of serious crimes absent being convinced that those people actually did the things that they have been accused of doing. And that means a prosecutor has to be able to prove not only what the defendant did, but why the defendant did it. No narrative is complete, compelling, or true unless we learn a person's motivations for the things he has done. And no national security strategy can be competent or successful unless we learn what motivates our enemies to act. Not so we can understand them better, we're not talking about some pedantic sociology experiment, but so we can stop them, so we can discredit them, and so we can defeat them. As you've heard from Frank, in the early to mid-1990s, I had the privilege of leading the government's prosecution against the Blind Sheikh, the terrorism case that was tried by Judge McCarthy. Back in those days, much like today, we had administration spokesmen, Justice Department lawyers, and intelligence community officials spouting the CARE-certified, Muslim Brotherhood-approved Idiot's Guide to Islam. Religion of peace, period, full stop, end of story, move along. In the four corners of Judge Mukasey's courtroom, however, things were different. Back in those days, the big difference between then and now is that no matter what was being said in Washington, in the academy, or in the media, a trial was still a trial, and there was no jihad against information. In our courtroom, it was not only permitted to tell the truth, it was required to tell the truth. We got to prove that there were commands to warfare against non-Muslims in Islamic scripture, that those commands were accurately conveyed by renowned scholars of Islam, and that believing Muslims were animated to commit atrocious acts under that profound influence. Now, don't get me wrong. No one believed or suggested that Islamic supremacism is the only way to interpret Islam. Nor did anyone contend that all Muslims wanted to live under, much less impose, a fundamentalist construction of Sharia, Islam's totalitarian framework for society. Indeed, our case could not have been proved had it not been for the pro-American patriotism of a number of Muslims who helped us infiltrate terror cells and present a convincing case to the jury. But it is simply a fact that we have enemies, that they seek to destroy the West, and that they are catalyzed by an ideology that is knowable and that is derived from an interpretation of Salam that's a whole lot more mainstream than we'd like to believe it is. In fact, it is the dominant Islam of the Middle East, and all we need to do is pick up the newspaper and magazine accounts of the Arab Spring, I think, to know that. I always think the simplest way to look at it is to look at the Blind Sheikh himself. Omar Abdul Rahman was utterly incapable of performing any forcible action that would be useful to a terrorist organization. He was blind from childhood and beset by more maladies than I could describe. He was incapable of building a bomb, hijacking a plane, planting an IED, or carrying out an assassination. Yet, he wasn't just in the terrorist organization. He was its unquestioned leader. And unlike the imaginary Islamophobe faction of the American conservative movement that I supposedly lead, this was an organization that actually exists. What qualified the Blind Sheikh to be the leader? I assure you, it wasn't good looks and charisma. The Blind Sheikh is a doctor of Islamic jurisprudence, graduated from Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the center of Sunni Islamic learning since the 10th century. He is a globally recognized authority on Sharia. He was able to lead our enemies because he was indisputably a master of their ideology. In 1995, we were able to prove that in a court of law solely because we had a judge who was dedicated to the rule of law, a judge who was determined that the case would be decided not based on fear or favor, but based on the facts, wherever they led us. Judge Mukasey understood the law, and he understood that what makes America exceptional is Americans. He knew that a jury of New Yorkers, in their American sense of justice, would want to know not only what happened, but why. He knew this, and he knew this was not only what common sense required, but it was what American law demanded. Because of that, we not only have a dozen jihadists who were quite deservedly convicted and sentenced to long prison terms, we have what remains the most comprehensive and accurate historical record of who our enemies are, what they want to do to us, and their motivation. Now, that should not be the case. Obviously, all of us who were involved in the Blind Sheikh trial are proud to have played the parts that we played in the response to what was really the first time the government had to mobilize against jihad against our homeland. But let's face it, almost 20 years have gone by. Yes, that means I look worse. But with 2 additional decades to gather intelligence and study our enemies, our country's security should look better. And it doesn't. Today, we still face enemies who want to destroy us, but they are aided and abetted by people in and out of government who throw sand in our eyes, who want you to believe that the threat to America comes not from Islamic supremacism, but from the people who are trying to expose Islamic supremacism, to alert their fellow Americans to the dangers imperiling our way of life. Some of these people are just well-meaning, but foolish. Some of them, though, know exactly what they're doing. While they don't endorse terrorist methods, they do sympathize with the Islamist indictment against the United States, the old blame America first crowd that lays all the world's ills on our doorstep. Except, it's not just the blame America first crowd. They're on the political left. The effort to blind us from the threat, to slander as Islamophobia the advocacy of sound national security measures and the protection of Western institutions, has spread its tentacles into the conservative movement. National security should not be a conservative or a liberal issue. Preserving our liberties ought to be a priority for the vast majority of Americans. Protecting our constitutional norms from Sharia incursions ought to be a nonpartisan imperative. Judge Mukasey has served America that way for his entire career. It is the light that he carried with him from the federal bench to the Justice Department, where his tenure as Attorney General was distinguished, honorable, and altogether too short. But though it's always possible that I'm being parochial about this, I will always see his greatest contribution to our national security yesterday, today, and tomorrow this way. By following the law faithfully, he ensured that history would fairly and accurately record the ideology of our enemies, what they did, and why they did it. Neither political correctness nor willful blindness can efface that record. As his admiring friend and a proud past recipient of this very award, it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce our 2012 Freedom Flame honoree, Attorney General Michael Mukasey.